or accept this deen. So, I mean, how can we be so unstrategic when we have an entire chapter like that? And maybe that is something for you, not to interrupt your salah, but to really reflect on the wonders of the Quran when we do Maghrib Salah, inshallah.
You can start.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. If I could continue, then maybe I should just summarize these last two slides, Surah Al-Fath and Surah Al-Rum, and there are many others, with a conclusion that there is no excuse for Muslims to act in unstrategic ways. We can't simply be high on principle, cunning on tactics, and be reft or absent of strategy. And if there's anything that you must learn from the Quran, besides everything else, it is the centrality of strategy as a way for the Ummah to think its way out of trouble and to move forward harmoniously in this world. And so if I can put the lessons of what you have learned, is that in both the two that I have cited for you, the strategic goal in Surah Al-Fath was to re-enter Makkah as a safe and secure sanctuary for all religions, and in Surah Al-Rum was to have enough peace in Medina for the consolidation and the growth of the Muslim community after many years of sacrifice in Makkah. The critical outcomes that was needed on Hudaybiyah was a critical period of peace within which people can actually hear the message that you have. Because people cannot hear the message when their hearts are filled with fear and their minds are confused and they are feeling insecure. So you need sufficient peace for the message to sink in, and Hudaybiyah's treaty gave them that. And in Surah Al-Rum, there was suddenly the absence of two superpowers sucking everyone into war, so there was just enough peace to be able to move to Medina and consolidate it. The important outputs, the one output on Hudaybiyah was a treaty that the Muslims really, they stuck to the letter and the spirit of the treaty even when the others breached it. But they understood they will withstand that. So they needed a negotiated treaty there, and Surah Al-Rum, they needed a set of alliances in order to get to the conditions. And the crucial inputs was more at Hudaybiyah was to withhold yourself from war, to withhold yourself from anger, to withhold yourself from justified rage. And in Surah Al-Rum, it was to absorb the punishment, the torture, the humiliation in Makkah, to be resilient in the face of it while you wait for the moment when things were ready for a strategic retreat. Is anyone beginning to see some patterns about what our tasks are strategically? Okay? If it dawns on you, just put up your hand. Let's move on from there. And so that sketch put in different ways is what is commonly called an outcomes-based approach. We need to understand what is the long-term principal goal that a 7 million Muslim community has set for itself in the United States of America. And so the debate we had earlier, is it eventually we want to make America a Khilafat? Dr. Oda has given us those kind of things. Is it that we want to take over and make Sharia rule everywhere and all over? I think we have spoken about it as a code of ethics for us as individuals, and when we come to the mosque, as a way of observing our worship. But what we do want to have is that we want a greater synergy, a greater harmony between the maqasid, the objectives and the intents and the values and the ethical imperatives of our Sharia with the instruments that make up the Qanun in a place like America. We want to narrow the gap between the two. In South Africa, we said, what are the outcomes that we want from our transition from apartheid to democracy? And we said that we need to have, we called it in various ways, we said we want a Darul Salam, a place of peace, a Darul Aman, a place of security for everyone, a Darul Shahada, a place for the free profession of our mutual faiths. Some people even suggested a Darul Da'wah, a place where you can give the message in conditions of peace. And so we said in the medium to long term, that is something that is desirable, where you can pray, where you can observe your religion. And we went from the minimalist Imam Shafi, who said, wherever a Muslim can pray, there is the Darul Islam. And we took the words of Ibn Taymiyyah, who said that Allah's favor is on the non-Muslim ruler who is just, rather than on the Muslim ruler who is unjust. And therefore, there is no contradiction between Nelson Mandela becoming our president and us living there as Muslims. We asked, what are our strategic priorities? We understood that we needed to lay the foundations, build an institutional base like you're doing here at MAPS, and to be able to socialize our children into this religion, give them the education, the opportunities that they want, not only as Muslims, but generally. And therefore, what do we need to deliver? And so in much the same way that we deliver educational services, religious services, personal law services, charity to the whole community, outreach, joint campaigns to be part of this nation, and all aligned in the short term. We need alliances, and I think that there is, from last night, clearly we need an anti-bigotry alliance, not just an anti-Islamophobia, not just an anti-racist, not just an anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic, and so forth. We need genuine principled alliances against all forms of bigotry, all forms of exclusion, all forms of inequality and injustice with other communities. And we need to divide our human and financial resources between our internal goals as Muslim and our external goals as citizens. So in South Africa, I don't want to go to this too much. Nelson Mandela led a successful transition, which people marvel about in the world. How did we stop bloodshed? How did we reconcile? How did we have an inclusive government? He kept his eye on a free, just and democratic South Africa. He never promised anyone an Islamic state or anything like that. And so we agree that that was what we needed as Muslims. It was not just consistent with our values, it was also in our interests. And therefore, he wanted unity and peace, and he wanted stable change. On stable change, we said to ourselves, we don't want to destroy what we need to inherit. And we also understood we need unity, because our colonialists have no other country to go to, they are here to stay. So if we're going to coexist, it may as well be peaceful. And therefore, for example, the tactics that he used, he provided sunset clauses. So I don't want to go into too much of the political philosophy, but he said basically, white judges, white army generals and so forth, you can keep your jobs for 5 years, we won't touch your pensions, buy into it and you may stay on longer and so forth, but we're now going to start doing, because he understood, unlike many in the Arab Spring, understood that the main priority was to avoid counter-revolution. You can go to a glorious death with your principles, or you can be around 10, 20 years later and build towards your objectives and your principles. But we needed also to understand that wrong things happened in the past, and therefore we had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It wasn't the Reconciliation Commission because we don't want to paper over injustice, but I just wanted to show you that everything that I've shown you before is possible, and that we have had the good fortune of trying some of these things out in South Africa, and it's more than theory. So leadership, and this is why Dr. Oda, Dr. Abadi and myself, we do some of these things. We are not trying to change the entire ummah, but we are trying to recruit a few tugboats, small little ships that are all engined. It can pull 10 times its weight. It can push 10 times its weight. It can steer 10 times its weight, because it's all engine. It can make sharp turns within a few meters. It can gain speed within a few meters. It can stop within a few meters. The ummah is like this tanker. It takes miles before it can change course. It needs lots of clear sea before it can even think of changing a degree or two. And therefore, our objective with you is to turn MAPS, leadership as you're sitting here, into the most powerful tugboat that can nudge the ummah into the kind of strategic direction that it requires, that can deliver the kind of defeat to the extremists, that can cause a reform of the orthodoxy without destroying it. It nudges until we, not nudges, I should find a different word. Nudges means the excrement. It taps it until you get it into a better direction. And so we're going to need different leadership types that's going to be able to do it, but I'm not going to spend much time on that. But I do want to spend a little bit of time on this, because in times of uncertainty and times of crisis, there are 4 kinds of leaders that emerge. The vertical axis is between those who lead by values and those who lead by rules. And so what happens when leaders encounter new situations, unprecedented situations, crisis situations, uncertain situations? Those, for example, who have a memory of great values, when we were homogeneous and we were loving each other and so forth, and they encounter the new, they effectively think of the past and they want to recreate the past. And so that's nostalgic leadership. If only we can have the Prophet amongst us. If only Abu Bakr, not Baghdadi, but Ibn Siddiq, if only he can be with us here today, we can show them. And that's a lot of the Salafi instinct. Returning to the cradle of Medina, when things were pure, uncontaminated by all this technology and different people who are all around, and we were fewer but better. That's nostalgic leadership. And you must test where you are on that matrix. Then there are those who when they encounter the new, they see themselves only as forcing rules on people. That's demagogic leadership. That's what I think the US is going through right now. It's people who say, not let us be more multicultural. Say, no, build a wall. Let's not become more accepting and make peace by no. Ban Muslims. Get a register. No, let's not do this, that, and the other. You see, they think they can legislate their way out of the crisis. And that's demagogic leadership. And that's what's sweeping the first world at this moment, when they encounter all these new people, new situations, new economies, and so forth. Then there are those who only know rules. And when they encounter new, they give bureaucratic leadership, managerial leadership. Yeah, let's do A, B, C, D. And we have those in our committees and so forth. And they're necessary, because someone has to look at the accounts, and someone has to look at this, and someone has to prescribe what needs to be done. And then you get those that we are trying to create here. When they encounter the new, they draw on their values and they set out a strategic path forward. They see around the corner. They anticipate, they analyze. They can say, now if they play chess, not drafts or dominoes. When your opponent puts down a 6, you've got to put down a 6. No, they play chess. Because the objective is the king. And so, we need to understand what leadership we want to offer if we are to become the tugboat. And so, that leadership that we're looking for, it's leadership that can distinguish between tame problems and wicked problems. Tame problems are complicated, but we've seen it before. Wicked problems is, hell, this is unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. It's complex. Not complicated, like in tame problems, but wicked, like in complex problems. Tame problems are resolvable because the number of unknowns are few. Wicked problems are intractable because there's no known formula. That's the situation I think we're moving into. Tame problems you can harmonize through good management. Okay, win-win. Let's get a win-win. What do you need to win? What do you need to win? Okay, I give you half of what you need and I give you half of what you need. Listen, there's the problem, we've harmonized it. This one says, no. We can't harmonize, we've got to trade off. We have a budget of 50,000. We can either build a new minaret or we can build a classroom. Not a classroom with half a minaret. That's harmonizing. This is saying, okay, listen, strategically we need that classroom. The minaret can wait. We let Haider stand on top and wear a kufiya. So again, I think we're not giving you answers to the questions that you have. We are trying to give you new thoughts, shock you with the reality out there, and then say to you, what leadership are you capable of? And so you've got to decide, where are you spending all your time? I mean, you can either remain in the crisis corner, you just give leadership because there's a crisis now, or in the urgent corner, let's quickly do this, we've got a deadline tomorrow. Or you can move to the important corner, listen, this thing is coming up in 2 weeks' time, let's plan now already. Or in the proactive corner, listen, I think 6 months from now, Trump will be in there and he's going to start thinking about this register and so forth. And so can we now start reaching out? Because if we reach out 6 months when he does do the register, we are going to be opportunistic. And the Christians and the Jews who came here that night when Justice Oda spoke, they said, we didn't hear from you for 6 months, now we hear from you again because there's a register tomorrow. You see, if you're proactive, you will do it now. 6 months from now, it will be a crisis. 5 months from now, it will be urgent. 3 months from now, it will be important. So it's really doing first things first. Sequence your actions so that preferably you operate there. You can't avoid the other three, but that's where you've got to spend, I don't know, either 50% of your time, maybe another 25% there, maybe 15% there, inshallah 5% there. Does that add up to 100, Yasser, with your math that you did that in one of your courses?
It never adds up. It's usually 90% on the urgent. It's on Islamic organizations.
Yeah, I know. And when leadership then knows, the zone of control, the things that we have direct control over, it's inside and small. Then this is our zone of influence. And so victims are here. Me, myself, I. Let's go into the mosque. Ya Allah, let's make dua. This Trump is getting phenomenal now. Let's get into the mosque. So you go into your zone of control, where you can give the adhan on time, pray, recite beautifully, and that's important. But you must extend from your zone of control to your zone of influence. And that is building coalitions. It's reaching out. This is reaching in. This is reaching out. So that you make the alliance proactively, the coalitions proactively. You create a principle rather than a tactical, urgent thing. And your zone of inspiration, you've got to communicate more. You don't go silent. Our tendency sometimes in a crisis is to go silent. Whereas you've got to inspire people with who you are, with what you do, with your importance to society, and the beauty of your message, and the distinction that you have from the Daesh people, etc., etc. So I think that it's very important that we understand some of those things. And therefore, Marcel Proust once said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. We all want new landscapes, but very few of us are prepared to change our eyes. And I think that the difference is that landscapes is to try and find another imam to give us a better fatwa. New eyes is taking what Sheikh Jasser has said and applying that to your reading of the Quran, because you can't shop around for fatwas. So you've got to have new eyes. And so what do new eyes see? That the Maqasid approach is rooted in Islam. It's necessary to confront new and unlimited events, which shifts us from preservations to rights. The strategic middle, we need to get it. And that the middle is the default position of the ummah, ummatan wasatan. Be aware of the end and then plan back. Where do you see yourself in 20 years' time? And therefore, what happens in year 20? What happens in year 19? What happens in year 15? What happens in year 12? What happens in year 1? And work that way. And so, we've already spoken about that leadership thing. And so, in a real sense, if we can achieve anything in this process with you, is that we want to inculcate in you a Maqasidi approach, both as an understanding of Islam, as a set of conceptual tools that you have, as a strategic ability that you have, and a way of interpreting our faith, and let that wheel turn, and that you allow yourself to be turned by that wheel, and in turn act as a tugboat that turns the bigger wheel, that is your community and the ummah. And so, in a sense, unlike what Daesh wants in Tabiq, eliminating the grey zone, we say the grey is a lovely place. Don't be afraid of the grey. Uncertainty has been, there are a few black and whites, and they're mostly in the domain of Aqidah, and they're mostly in the domain of Ibadah, in belief and in worship. We are not here to change the way you believe and the way in which you pray and the fast and all of those kind of things. I think that it's in recognition that the world has changed that we look at how Maqasid al Syaria can be able to give us a new way of confronting the mu'amalat, the worldly matters, our relationships with others, our living together. And so if you accept the kind of model that I think we've accepted in South Africa as Dar al-Shahada, place of free profession, of safety, security, peace for Muslims and so forth, then there's a few things. Then, as I've said before, integration is the better model, rather than say assimilation, becoming the same, or isolation, or communitarianism, where your community wants to be exceptional and you don't want to be part of the rest of society. You just want a bit of real estate to do what you want to do anyway. Speak your own language, eat your own food, pray your own prayers, with no citizenship. Integration gives us the possibility of being Muslim and being citizens. And so, for example, we then learned in South Africa from that model to live with multiple identities. And so, Nelson Mandela said, do you want to be Muslims and South Africans? We said, yes, of course. He said, is Muslim going to be the noun or the adjective? We said, no, our belief is very important, make it a noun. The naming word for those who don't know grammar. Make it the noun. And so we said, yeah, we're Muslim. So South Africa is then the adjective. Yes, so we are South African Muslims. Then you can put little qualifiers at the end. I'm a South African Muslim of Malay origin. And if I stay here long enough, I could be a South African Muslim of Malay origin who support the Seahawks, if they can just get to the finals. That then brings us to the issue of minimum and maximum. Because we must really sometimes wonder, and I think that the question answer session with Dr. Oda was just so fascinating, about women and about this and about that. Because we try to deal with this minimum maximum thing. And to explain it, what do you need to be compliant minimally with your obligations to God, and what would be the conditions that would want to give you maximum expression of your faith? And so I'm very worried in South Africa, because we negotiated a thing where minimum compliance meant that the objective of our dress was modesty. That we said, okay, the scarf or the hijab was important for minimum compliance, but now people are riding a bus through it and they're going for maximum expression because the number of niqabs is going, and I'm sure that soon we are going to have a situation where they are going to say, listen, we can't have this anymore at the airport. It just takes one bomb blast to blow the myth. I mean, we got away with a bit more in South Africa. We wanted at minimum halal meat, then they gave us half an abattoir, and now we want the halal park. So we want to go from minimum compliance to maximum expression, and so we can really go. And I mean, some Muslims are becoming unscrupulous. We had a minimum thing where 12:30, the schools let their Muslim children go to Jumu'ah, the work lets them go, and then the next thing, some people who go, they say, okay, now I'm not going back to work. Now they're getting so rude that they don't want to go and work at all on a Friday. So they're moving from minimum expression to minimum compliance to maximum expression. And I think if you don't watch these things, these are not things that must happen by accident. A community must plan around how it deals with those kind of things. And then, of course, the issue of consistency. What you want for yourself, you must give to others. It has two applications. If there are certain rights you want for yourself, you must be able to share that with your neighbors. And for us, the challenge was, and particularly for me as Governor of the Western Cape, when, for example, the issue of civil unions came up. Not marriages, but contracts between homosexual couples. We could have had a situation in which we say, no, we want our marriages recognized as Muslims and so forth, but we don't want their contracts recognized. Tomorrow there will be a government who loves gays and hates Muslims. They say, no, you remember that thing? You made our constitution arbitrary. So we are now going to invert it. We are going to give them marriage rights, and don't you come, you go to court, and you do whatever. There's no special favor for you. When you start making things arbitrary, Nelson Mandela called any government elected by a majority, he called it a temporary majority. Because they're only a majority until the next election. And therefore you must never make laws for a temporary majority. You must make laws based on permanent values. And then secondly, I remember my advice when the Muslims of New York were fighting for the so-called 911 mosque. And Imam Faisal was trying to explain, this is not near 911, it's a musalla, and this, that, and the other. And I said, the best way to campaign for a mosque in New York is to campaign for a church in Saudi Arabia. No one will question your sincerity. But we carry these ambiguities about us, and we can't speak about it because we don't want to wash dirty linen. But for as long as we don't wash dirty linen, who will trust us and believe us? So my conclusion is, this is where we are. This is where we need to be, and it's going to really take an enormous amount of hard work. So in the remaining, I hopefully we can do 20 minutes of this. You must please stay because all the certificates are ready to be handed out to you. But are there any questions, comments, challenges, and disagreements? Whatever you want to do of those four, do it quickly and shortly, inshallah.
Where have you sought to implement this design before, and how does it work, and what were some of the problems?
That's a difficult question. Let's take a few more. Any other? Please.
The question is, where do we begin? I guess I do get to, some non-Muslims support me, and then how can we help? So what should I tell them? What's the first thing that we get more bang for the buck, basically, if we get help for such requests?
Let's take a third one.
I have a follow-up to that.
Yes, please.
Not just non-Muslim, but within a Muslim community, how do we bring other groups within a Muslim community who may not focus on the inside circle like they show, right? Which is all about prayer and thing. How do we get them motivated to engage in this broader discussion around belief? Bring this value to that, right?
Okay, on the first question, let me say that this is largely the evolution, I think, of a Muslim community in Cape Town. 350 years old. I don't want to repeat the story, I'll just use some key words. Brought there as slaves, religion banned for a century, the religion proscribed for the rest of it, and we suddenly free in 1994, but we had good leadership throughout the apartheid years. Muslims were being seduced to join the white establishment, and we had enough leaders to say, no. Our values of justice means that we will reach out to the black majority, even if it means we don't get the kind of comforts that they were promising us. So it starts off with the idea of strategic resilience, to choose your long-term path and then be resilient to absorb the blows in it. I mean, and I tell the story, very few people know. Everyone knows that Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. Very few people know that in the cell right next to him for 26 years was Ahmad Kathrada. Everyone knows that Steve Biko was tortured to death. Very few people know that Imam Abdullah Harun was similarly tortured to death in 1969. And so the point that I'm making is, that very early on, you've got to choose a side. And it is not a side that is simply opportunistic, it's a side that is principled. You may play tactical games within it, but not principled games within it. And wallahi, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, even those who wanted to choose the white establishment, and who came up with all kinds of reasons. They even said, yeah, but Musa went to speak to Fir'aun. He even advised Fir'aun, why didn't we do that? And we remained fairly principled about that, but tactical in it. And so, 94, Nelson Mandela is elected president. We almost fall off our chairs when 9 of his cabinet ministers were Muslim. The Minister of Justice, and so forth and so forth. That we get the kind of things that creates the Daru Shahada, the abode, the shared abode, and so forth. To the extent that I think we're beginning to reap the problems of it, because some people are taking advantage and using the free space to now begin to do hate speech and intolerant language and tie up women in their homes, etc., etc. So what I want to say is that that's the model that we have had, but I think complacency and too much freedom is getting some generations to forget how hard fought it was. The second question, where do we begin? I think that I made a joke after Jummah with Haider yesterday. We were debating whether my khutbah was too harsh. And I said, Haider, whatever it is, don't let a good crisis go to waste. We are in a moment of crisis. You may not feel it in Seattle and Redmond, but the whole world is experiencing this crisis. And when the wrong people rejoice for your leader, you must be more worried. Assad rejoiced. Sisi rejoiced. And so we can go on to find who Abu Ghabi rejoiced. And so you shall know them by their rejoicers. So the point is that we mustn't be alarmist, but it gives us the opportunity to be proactive now. And this crisis is a moment that focuses the mind. Now is the time to say, what do we envision for a future America? If our children's children must live here, what kind of America must they live in? You've got to first dream. And once you've fixed your dreams, you've got to say, now how do we get there? And then work down that outcomes-based approach and say, then what are the key outcomes? If that's the strategic goal and principal goal, what's that? And then somewhere along that, very early on, like I would say, I was telling Haider, I would say to you, within a month, before there is even an inauguration, I would say that Washington State, Redmond, Seattle, or just Redmond must be able to convene a summit to launch a coalition for virtue. The people who were all here last night, 50% Muslim, 50% people of other faiths. It's got to be turned into one in which we also invite more representatives from the African American community, the Hispanic community, get other people, have a conference to say, how do we fortify America against bigotry? Not Islamophobia only, bigotry as a whole. So I would say that's something that is absolutely critical. The weekend, for example, this is what we would do before the apartheid president would go to parliament. We'd start the Thursday night with the Hindus. When they gather together in their places of worship, they prayed for relief from the suffering. The Friday, the Muslims, the Friday night, the Jews, the Sunday, the churches. And we had a weekend of rolling prayer to God. And So the problem with the middle ground is that it is too ordinary sometimes. And that's our strength. We are ordinary. But we must learn to dramatize our ordinariness. We've seen what we're up against with Daesh. We carry children every day. But who takes videos and posts it and show the child happy on our arms? For them it's a big thing. We recite nasheed and love it. But whoever takes a video and showing the nasheed playing while we are giving food to the poor, carrying water to Flint, and having a clinic for the communities who are ill. And sometimes we are trapped by this idea, don't let the left hand know what the right hand has done. That is to protect someone from embarrassment. But it must never be a barrier to pronouncing that you are on the side of good. And so, how would we do those kind of things? I would say that is priority number one, to use the goodwill that exists at this moment and the fear of the crisis to fortify us from that with these kind of examples. And then the intra-Muslim, the intra-Muslim coherence. You know, sometimes we make the unity of Muslims a precondition for uniting with others. If we Muslims in South Africa had waited till the Iranian-inspired guys were on board with us, and the ulama, the clergy were on board with us, and the Ikhwan was on board with us, we'd have missed the boat. We'd have sat there in April 1994 out in the cold. And so the two processes happen together. As you reach in, you reach out. And you never make the one a precondition for the other, and you never give others within you a veto. No, I will never speak to maps if they are speaking to Jews. Sorry, brother, you're already on your path to Jannah. See you there, but we are going to have to do this. I mean, sometimes you kill people by ignoring them. So that, but Ahi, you have been patient.
Yeah, so I go back here, we have told about the Roman-Persian War conflict, and I start from there. And up to this today, we can look around the British-American conflict. We get America getting independence, and before we are 1948, India-British conflict, and Pakistan-India conflict. Now another issue, Kashmir, then another issue, then we have the Cold War in 1980s. So there is a conflict, and now we see another issue between Russia, America, America, China, India, Vietnam, Philippines, those kind of things. Everything shifting. I don't see any relief. And we have whole issue in Middle East. Now we are talking about Daesh. So now we have new issue in Myanmar, right? Is it true, right? It's a fact. So, and you told about there was an issue in like Nelson Mandela in South Africa, right? So all this kind of issues not related to religion or whatever. So I think all this kind of issue is related to financial or economic interest. Or so, and this is the root cause, and it is motivating by the time to time by religion, by color, culture, or ethnic origin. We have problem between mosque to mosque. Some are like like cultural-based mosque. So how we relate all kind of things together and bring harmony in the society.
No, thank you very much. I'm going to answer that. I'm going to think about it a bit more. Behind you is one, and then the brother with a W.
My question is that South Africa are few percent of Muslim, and they have so big influence on the government, 9 ministers, so many parliament members. and you have rather clear-cut idea about the American Muslim society. So what American Muslim leaders should do in order to create that kind of influence, what you have done on South African government?
Thank you very much. Number 6, the W.
I was wondering how we responsibly balance Sharia as an ethical framework which has bounds with consistent rights-based approach you mentioned about how coming and supporting different groups. So I was wondering how do we deal with that tension, which the rights-based approach pertaining to other communities might come in tension with our ethical framework. So how do we deal with that if we want to maintain our identity but also be part of building coalition?
Well, thank you very much. Let me deal with those 3 very quickly. I think that the brother was describing a current scenario, and almost counter-instinctively, I want to say that we may end up missing the Obama years, because I think the unwillingness to commit troops after the mistake of Libya, the unwillingness to give Israel, for example, the right to go and bomb Iran's nuclear installations and rather negotiate a deal, which has been called weak. I think, and the speed with which, for example, the current Israeli right wing tried to pass a law in the Knesset the other day, a few days after Trump was president-elect, they tried to push a law through that says all retrospective settlements are now legalized. And they said, we'll do this now because there's no Obama to hold us accountable and to withhold our money or whatever the case may be. So the point that I'm making is that was for me the beginning of a sign of a tiredness of militarism as a way out. And the question was, could the Ummah, could the global Muslim community find a bit of breathing space to think our way out of trouble? And hopefully that is not an interregnum that will close. And but I think it is still worthwhile for us to be able to pursue an agenda of carving out peace. And Dr. Oda should add to it. My understanding is that the best ecosystem within which Islam flourishes and grows is the ecosystem of peace. It is not conflict. Conflict is a reluctant thing that the Ummah enters into. We have made the greatest expansion when we were a civilization and not a military empire. When we won the battle of ideas, when we stunned people with our innovations and our technologies and our medicine and our astronomy and our literature and all of those kind of things. And so I think that even if the war rages all around us and within us, some of us must rescue the civilizational impulse of Islam. And we must be able to build on Ibn Rushd, build on Ibn Sina, build on the Qanun of medicine, build on all of these kind of things in order, I think, to let Islam speak for itself rather than the false prophets. So I think the problem you describe is a very, very deep one, and we need to solve it, but sometimes some things are out of our control and we've got to guard our corner. How would an American Muslim community, for example, try to emulate the kind of things that we did in the height of apartheid, the transition, and post-apartheid? We learned very early on that before Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, before he was Rasulullah, the messenger of God, he was Al-Amin, the trustworthy. And so many of us want to be the messengers, but we haven't been trustworthy. We haven't earned the title of Al-Amin first. So if you want to start anywhere, become Al-Amin. Become people who are trusted to tell the truth, to stand for truth, to be honest, to be fair in our dealings, to be transparent in the way in which we do things, to tell the truth even if it's a sword that cuts inside and outside. When we tell half a truth about American imperialism, but we ignore Muslim extremism, we're not Al-Amin. When we make excuses for violence in our name, or silent, vocal about stuff like of one sort, silent about other stuff, we are not Al-Amin. And so the point of the matter is, if there is a starting point, become Al-Amin, and then the rest will follow. And the basis is then set to become the followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the third one is the tricky one. And I'm going to call Dr. Oda up to help out. But you know, if we hear everything that he has told us this morning, and I faced this myself. I was governor of a province that, for example, was the wine-producing province of the country, and the Muslim fundamentalists called me a sellout. I was Minister of Health when abortions were legalized, and they called me a sellout. I was Premier when civil unions in the country were legalized, and so forth. And I used the framework about some consistency on some of those matters, and whether this clashes with the Shari'i ethics that I think that we speak about on all of those kind of matters. We needed to find a way. And so, for example, it was comfortable. There was no way we could not have the LGBT community. They were a fact of life. And more than a fact of life, they were some of the first whites who abandoned whitedom and joined the struggle and went to jail with us. So that earned their stay. More than some Muslims who had spoken a few other things. And so how would we deal with that? And so we ended up by saying, make it civil unions, but not necessarily marriages, because marriage has a spiritual, sanctified connotation to it. What people need is to regularize their life and to have contracts so that when one partner dies, there's inheritance and stuff like that, because that's what we have been deprived of for 300 years. And so those were the kind of tests. And so I think the idea of separating sin from crime, let God sort out ultimately what happens to them, because if it's ironic that the law, for example, that is invoked to punish gays is primarily a law to punish heterosexual adultery. But the same people who are calling for the stoning to death or the tossing from a tower of the one were very soft on the numerous instances of heterosexual adultery and fornication. And so I think that we needed to deal with some of those kind of things. I think at the end of the day, we are saved in a sense that the Qanun that we live in have their own laws with regard to that, and we live under that. That our laws do not ipso facto as Muslims apply to non-Muslims, and that's why we can be very strict with each other about drinking alcohol, but we hope that when a drunk person drives a car and a personal sin becomes a public menace, that the police will be there to sort that out. And so I think that those are some of the things. But Dr. Oda, the tension, I was just giving you a political opinion on it.
Well, yeah, Jazakallah khair. Well, the issue of the tension between Sharia and political decisions and so on. My take on this is that it's very important to separate the political from the Shari to, like in the language of the Islamic groups, to separate the da'wi from the siyasi, to separate the political from the da'wah, and not to mix the political action with what is Islam, what Islam is about. So there is a difference between Muslims speaking in a civil rights language or a civil rights approach versus Muslims speaking in the name of the Quran.
Yeah.
So I was like incredibly annoyed, and I wrote an article when people, after the Constitutional Court decision last year, 2 years ago, about gay marriage, they started to justify it from the Quran. So that is not. You can justify it on a civil rights basis or on the fact that this kind of union is not an Islamic union from the theology perspective. That is one political approach. There is another political approach that, if I may suggest as well, which is to ally ourselves with like-minded religious communities that even reject that civil union. That is another tool in that toolbox that you could also choose. And to me, that is closer to the principles of Islam. But I'm speaking as an opinion, and both are fine from a political perspective, as long as we're not saying that this is the Quran allowing this, and then some people go back and say, well, in the Islamic civilization, there was that poet who was gay, and he actually praised them. No, that this is not like you are mixing now Islam with a civil kind of approach. What to do and whether we take an approach with the rights groups or we take an approach that is with the religious groups and the churches that were against it and all that. This is subject to political thinking and strategizing. I personally don't know. I've been away for a long time from North America, and I don't have the feel. But I do think that strategically, we align ourselves too much with the ultra-liberal thought in terms of politics. And I think, just my thoughts, that there is a third way that strategically could be more beneficial for us as Muslims. Somewhere between the conservative kind of way and the liberal kind of way. Somewhere in between. Because you could be conservative socially from an Islamic perspective, and you could be liberal or work for social justice economically and fiscally, and that is missing in the American landscape. And I think that for Muslims to just simply squarely put themselves in the liberal square, I think is not the best strategy on the longer term, because we are part of a political landscape that gives those binary choices, and those binary choices are not win-win, they are always lose-lose, especially in our case. They are win-win for other people who have the resources to support both and gain the fruits of both, whoever wins. But we don't have the resources, and we perhaps need to feel that there is a global direction towards justice and towards more social justice on an economic perspective, from an economic perspective, and more conservatism from a religious perspective. And I think we are not aligning ourselves enough with movements like Black Lives Matter, or when Occupy Wall Street was out there And I think from what I see around the world, there are similar movements that are growing. They are still immature, and they are not, they don't find their way yet. But I think that the bottom 90% or bottom 80% economically and politically and everything, the world, the rest of the world, there is pressure on it, and the pressure will increase with all of these club of tyrants that we have now. And that pressure will eventually make these movements mature. Fees must fall. I know that this is politically a fringe movement in South Africa of students, mostly blacks, unfortunately going racist sometimes, which is a very wrong thing to do. But they are an expression of the frustration of an apartheid that ended in terms of color, but is still very much running in terms of economics. And that is the feel I get. Of course, I'm, again, not South African either, but the feel I get is that long term, these students' movement will grow, because this is unsustainable. The numbers don't sum up. The Arab Spring was one of those unsustainable situations. But of course, again, very immature. The Islamic parties, especially in the Egyptian case, because they were organized and they knew how to do elections, they jumped over the leadership of a country like Egypt without understanding what this means, and therefore now they're in prison. I think there will be another wave, not only in Egypt, but in the rest of the Arab world, because the situation in Iraq and Yemen and Syria, of course, top of the list, and Libya, for that matter, are unsustainable. We cannot continue like that. And at some point, the masses will have to stand up again, back to the streets. But in this point, we have to strategically think how the masses are going to make a serious change. Because the masses are not going to go out in the street and elect some Islamist party again, or whatever, try to do internal coups between different generals in the same army, like a la Yemen, a la Egypt, and all of that. The masses are not going to take that. It's going to be very bloody. And it's very important to strategize where the masses in the Arab world are going to do, especially after the expected expansion all the way to Iraq of the Israeli border. Strategically, it's very important that we position ourselves in that landscape, and it's very important to think. Perhaps some of my ideas are wrong, but it's very important that we discuss at that level, at the level of the bigger picture, even if we act locally. So the strategy is to think big and act locally.
So can I ask another question to this? I'm sorry, this is just limited time, we're running out.
Yeah.
So it seems like the anti-Muslim forces have united all around the world now. And also within Muslim, like this Daesh is a big danger to Islam. And for the first time, I think in the history, at least from my understanding, I'm seeing that those two forces, the damaging forces from within Islam and the damaging forces outside of Islam, have united together. I mean, this is beyond the community we live in. I think this is going to threaten the whole world. How do we create coalitions that are so broad to fight something that big?
Can I add on to that question? What is the World for All Foundation? And since you all have had success in South Africa, can we build upon that success for thinking for the entire Muslim Ummah globally? And build on it.
And the last question for the day.
It's not so much a question as a plea. As one of the members of the Christian community that's trying to be supportive of Muslim people in a situation where, as we all are aware, Islamophobia is growing, I need to plead for help, because I can say all kinds of things about what Islam is and isn't, but if I am not doing that in the context of a real relationship, it's very difficult. And we can have these large meetings like I belong to a bishops committee where we just held a whole conference on Islam in the city square, and people learned, but it wasn't much opportunity to create relationships. So we really need you to say to your fellow workers in your office if you're working, can we meet so I can tell you the problems that my people are having and see if you can be of help to us. People need to speak to their neighbors. I'd like to get to know you better because we feel a little isolated, and it'd be better if we knew each other as families. And people need, in couples, need to go approach pastors and churches and say, can we have someone come and speak to you on a Sunday morning, briefly? Because one of the things that we're all aware that needs to be done is that our children need to be trained to protect each other. Muslim students, as you well know, are being harassed in school. But if there are just a few other Christians or Jewish students around who have been in a group where they talk about what to do in that situation, that harassment can be shortcut, because all it takes is someone, just like on the bus, now you've probably heard the stories, people are wearing safety pins, which is a sign, I'm here to make you safe. And all you have to do when you see that is to reach out to that person, and they will intervene, which usually cuts short the harassment. The same thing would happen in schools, but we need to bring church children and synagogue children together with Muslim children that go to the same school and say, look, there's a problem and we need each other to deal with it. But that's not going to happen unless you all have the guts and the nerve to reach out and say, we need help, we need to get to know you better. How can we do that?
No, thanks very much. I think we should.
Yeah, we can reach out.
Yeah, we should try and respond to that point as I think a positive conclusion for the day. But dealing with the prior questions, I think that the idea of anti-Muslim forces galvanizing against us, I think that your sense may be correct, but I think we sometimes need to analyze with a scalpel rather than just a broadsword. Because if we work from a premise that all our enemies are raging against us, then I think we miss very important nuances and opportunities for coalitions and alliances and common work. And so I would think, for example, some of the things that Dr. Oda had discussed. I was in a conference with the leader of the Dalits, and after I had spoken about the situation of Muslims, she said exactly what someone this morning said, that that the Muslims in India are worse off than us, but how do we convince them to work with us? They are seeing our idols as more important than our common poverty and our common exclusion in India. And so, how do we find a way not to make, if I can call it that, our pet dislikes obstacles? How can we sequence and prioritize? Because sometimes we want to lead with homosexuality, sometimes we want to lead with Hindu idols, sometimes we want to lead with that, and then we force all our enemies against us. Whereas what we need is a scalpel that can say, listen, that will wait for tomorrow. And that issue, Allah will sort out. And this issue, we can work on. See, that's the wisdom of leadership that I think is absolutely required. Who was the first? Despite Orlando, who were some of the first groups to stand up in support of Muslims after Trump and the register? LGBT. And then the Jews. All our petites. So the point is, we're not saying principled alliances or even strategic. We're saying these are the things that a scalpel is more critical in how we go. I described in Adams, for example, we described the South African Revolution as a train. That it started off, I'll just use the geography I'm familiar with, in Washington DC, and the end was New York. Ideologically, not true, but the beginning point was apartheid and the intense suffering that it visited on everyone who was different from whites. The end goal was our socialist nirvana, the New York end point. But we said everyone who feels hurt by apartheid, or everyone who even hates apartheid, whether you are hurt by it or not, you are welcome on this train. And so there were some who jumped on the train from the white community. They were never going to go to New York with us because they had too much interest in the economic structures, but they, by virtue of being LGBT, they were persecuted by apartheid, sometimes worse than what Muslims were. By virtue of being Jews, World War II, they were facing their own internment in South Africa. They jumped on it despite Palestine. And for us, this was good because it meant that there were other whites who did not want to turn their guns onto the train as it was leaving the station, because they felt that there were people who naturally belonged to them. So from Washington to Baltimore, we had the protection of everyone, but that was as far, they just wanted to be safe. So some of them got off in Baltimore. Others said, no, let's go a bit further with this train. And then they came to Wellington, and then some said, okay, I think I've heard you all. I think I'm now here at a very kind of muscular liberal stop. This is where I'm getting off. Others who were go with them said, no, this is interesting, this conversation that's happening. You're beginning to persuade me, I'll go on another step. And so we went on and we came to Delaware. And then at Delaware, they said, yeah, this is nice and liberal for us. This is where we're going to get off now. And some who were with them on the liberal said, no, this conversation is actually interesting. I'm beginning to see that the mixed economy can work, a little bit of liberalism, a little bit of socialism. And so they traveled with us. So if you see what you're in as a train journey, where you are wanting to end in New York, it doesn't mean that the train only works with those who will start in Washington and end in New York. It means that those who will end with New York are principally with you. Those who go with you as far as New Jersey, they are strategically with you. Those who go with you as far as Wilmington, they are tactically with you. Those who go with you as far as Baltimore, they are self-interestedly with you. But the train has place for all. You can sort out who was right and wrong, but you must use the opportunity while on the train to unleash the power of persuasion. If you say to them, no, you stay with the apartheid forces, you may turn them into foot soldiers of the very thing that you hate. And so I would take a far more nuanced look amongst those who appear ultimately to be our enemies, and to say, isolate only the worst one at this moment, but everyone else is welcome. And then those who are within us, I think sometimes the enemies within may be more dangerous than the enemies without, because they dress like you, they talk like you, they pray like you, they eat like you, and they do everything like you. And so we need to, and you know, I've always been very what's his name, not perplexed but amused by the kind of typical Islamic weapon, the scimitar.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the curved sword. The thing about the scimitar, this curved sword, is that it has one sharp edge, and it has stayed with us. We only use it to hit out. In this age, we've got to have a double-edged sword, because we've got to hit in and hit out. That's the battle that we're fighting. And so, but I prefer the scalpel. That's just a metaphor.
Thank you.
but I prefer the scalpel. But the point that I'm making is, this is the nature of the beast. Your credibility to speak out depends on your ability to speak in. To defeat out is to defeat in. Otherwise, we always have the forked tongue metaphor with us. So I would say that's the complexity, the wicked problem, not the tame one. The tame one is when we just say, the enemy's out there. And then how do we, the World for All Foundation, very quickly. The World for All Foundation is something that I started a few years ago. And every time I thought I'll get fully into it, I was asked to occupy another political or diplomatic position. And so for the last year, alhamdulillah, and this is where I want to acknowledge Rashida Shabuddin. Rashida, just wave there with your peach.
Now they see.
So for the last year, because Rashida has always been the spouse of the ambassador, not allowed to work, and difficulty getting work permits, she succumbed to the idea that she will become the program manager of the World for All Foundation. But let me just say to you that she is a wonderful, gifted person in her own right, because the President of South Africa, President Mbeki, had appointed her as a Commissioner for Gender Equality. And she is not singularly, but she was leading the campaign from the Gender Advocacy Program for 50% of our parliamentarians to be women. And alhamdulillah, South Africa has the fourth highest, Rashida? Fifth highest gender representation in structures of parliament and cabinet and even the boardrooms in the world. If they could have 50% women in our rugby team, they'd do that also. So her considerable talents have taken this from a very kind of afterthought, part-time phenomenon into something that I think has taken us into different parts of the world. And so we take the South African experience and we try to not make other communities make their own mistakes. So one of our publications that will come out is Living Where We Don't Make the Rules, a guide for Muslim minorities. So a lot of the things there, inshallah, will be coming out in published form. And I'd be very happy to come and launch it with you when hopefully the Triple IT has published it, because I think there's wonderful, it's taken the speech of people like Sheikh Rashid Ghanouchi and Maqasid al Syaria, Tariq Ramadan and others, and put it together into such a guide. And it's based a lot on the South African model of doing things. I think I've been very fortunate to work with Dr. Huda Abadi, and we've, for example, recommended the South African negotiating strategy for the Syrian National Council and members of them. And so when we watch the news and they speak about preconditions and talks about talks, then we hear a familiar language that I think we were able to teach them, so that they don't get suckered into a negotiated solution, but they also don't rely only on an armed struggle, a battle to the death. And so I think that that's the kind of work that the World for All Foundation does. And so Rashida is now very empowered with the job. She's telling me to start ending. And so I want to, and so I think that part of what we want to do is to really take these lessons and roll it out. And then we encountered Dr. Oda, and we saw that the theological consistency between that what we were doing is not just a political methodology, it is very aligned to the primordial impulse of Islam. This why question, the intents, the objectives of the whole thing. And so let me end with a plea that our brother at the back had asked. You know, Rashida and I have a constant argument when we move into a house. She believes that the house should be shoe-free. I believe that the house should be shoe-friendly. We can always vacuum afterwards. And I know that many of us, when we come here, we want to keep elements of our identity and we practice it, and there's goodness in it. But I sometimes wonder if I had a house that was shoe-free, or at least every part of the house was shoe-free. Is it easy for my neighbors to visit? Could I just call them off the street and say, please come inside, because he may have a hole in his sock, and would feel embarrassed to take it off, and he'd say, no, I'll come another day. I mean, we all want the best education for our children. And so I'm very worried in South Africa that, having fought for good education for all, the tendency is now to build Muslim schools. And so our children don't get exposed to what is happening to others, and they don't get exposed to what's happening, what Islam is and what Muslims are. And so we live in blissful ignorance of each other, and we then get shocked out of our wits when a Trump comes along. But our children have not been allowed to lay a DNA of the name Muhammad and Salman and Maryam and Fatima to become known stuff for them, rather than just the representation of terrorism. It's just, I'm sharing idiosyncrasies with you. I think that in making things like our pet issues come between us and relationships, there's no way you can persuade someone when you are already against him by virtue of knowing that he is this and he is that. You are not even entering the possibility of a trusting, comfortable relationship where that person sees that you are innately a merciful, compassionate, loving Muslim person. And then he says, let me listen to your views about this. And you begin to say, I'm trying to reconcile these verses of Lut, and I just can't find my way around it. But I really think that you are such a wonderful person. You're destroying every stereotype. I'm now having a theological issue in my head that I must reconcile. But it will not stop me from ever defending your right to be. But if you don't even get it, he is seeing you respond to his stereotype with your stereotype, and the conversation is closed. So I think that so to end, I think we must respond to this thing for real relationships, and the best relationships are honest relationships where we know where we stand, but it's not a barrier. Sometimes we don't know whether we are going to be able to explain this thing that we have against someone, or that withholds us from someone. And so we rather put up the barrier. No, I don't speak to you. It's not that we don't speak to you. It's that I don't know how to explain this to you. So rather not speak. And so it becomes comfortable, but it does not advance the kind of beauty that we have in our cause. And I take lots of comfort, and I end on this note.
Can I ask you one question?
Okay.
Very specific.
You delaying yourself then?
No, you've seen maps a few times, or maybe twice, and engaged with us at least 3 occasions. What advice would you have to maps? Specific things that we can do in the light of the discussions we have had today, that we can make it more actionable, at least the leadership of the maps is here, so they can take it and make it a food for thought.
Look, I think that today was, and last night, let's not cut out last night. I see it as one continuum. I think that this is the most brilliant start that any organization could do to respond to the crisis that is impending. I would say that you have opened yourself up to a way of thinking that we may not fully understand it yet. We're going to have to think through it and so forth. And I would suggest that we should come for a second round to then get down more into particularities and specific issues, because I think it was very important for you to get the theory of Maqasid al Syaria today and the theory of strategic thinking rooted in the Quran today. That was as much as what we could do, and then you needed to see Dr. Abadi's thing to know what we are competing against inside. Last night was what are we competing against from the outside. Dr. Huda Abadi, what are we competing against inside? And in the midst of all of that discussion, it was, is there theological literacy that we can be using? And Dr. Oda has given us the foundation. And is there a strategic impulse in the Quran that can guide us? And hopefully, inshallah, I've been able to give you a glimpse into that. That's as much as what we could achieve over the last 2 days. But the unseen achievement is the goodwill from outside. So I said it loosely before, I'm going to say it very formally. The water is boiling now, make the tea immediately. The offer from the back, from here, from last night, to get into a coalition for virtue is on the table. Take the lead, Mr. President, and say who will be a convening committee with me from other Muslims and from amongst the community who were represented last night, and from the communities who were not represented, like Black Lives Matter, the Hispanics and others, and let's see if a planning committee can come together. So I would say that that is one for the crisis at hand. I think that some of the things that that I mentioned very loosely last night, before our chairperson got up and scared me.
He's not scaring today.
He's tame today. He's not a wicked problem today. But I would say that the idea of an inter-community civil rights defense committee could be something with a toll-free number that people from all over Washington state could be phoning in. If there's a problem, maybe you carry the phone for 5 hours, you give it to Riyadh for the next 5, and so it goes, that there's always someone to respond. Find lawyers from within our community and from without who have experience in human rights laws, and put together both a legal defense and a legal advance committee, so that they are already studying NCS, the law about exit and entry that lays the rule for barring Muslims and registering Muslims and all of. Let's proactively study it so that we don't wait for it. Our input is ready. So I would do those kind of fairly immediate things that I think are within our grasp. I would build the spiritual resources of our community with sabr and with taqwa and fortitude and the ability to present our religion in the most beautiful ways. Nelson Mandela had a wonderful saying. He said, let us surprise them with our generosity. Let us surprise them with our generosity. This is the time to do more good, not to retreat. Let us use this beautiful base that you have here, this Islamic center, to radiate out what is absolutely critical. Did you want to?
I would add as well. I mean, do not be distracted by the extreme voices. Like I'm noticing I've been here for 2 days only, but just I heard a few things. I realized that there are some extreme and loud voices, and they distract you from what you're trying to do. Because I think building bridges with the wider community and with the wider even Muslim community, which is usually not coming to the masjid all the time. They are everywhere, in every city, and the wider non-Muslim community. Even though the extreme voices will try to hinder that. And you have to take a leadership courage of just ignoring the extremes and building bridges with the wider community.
And I would say, this crisis that we're in, give leadership and find things to do for young people before ISIS finds things to do for young people. If they think you are timid in the face of Trump, that you are just hiding in the mosque and you're not doing anything, and the first call through those beautiful videos and the nasheeds and the messaging and the first thing our children says, stand up to Trump. This is the way you must do this. We will target on this day when he is inaugurated. Be ready for this. And they give them violent stuff to do. I think let them know that their parents, that their leaders are planning things. That on inauguration day, we are going to have, for example, a hand-holding ceremony around that Seattle Tower. I'm just thinking off the top of my mind that we are going to join forces with everyone in a show of action, and that's the kickoff. And then if this registry comes in, be ready, because we are going to mobilize the schools and we are going to do X, Y, and Z. And this kind of committee must be able, so that young people know from the outset that there are things for them to do. Otherwise, others will find things for them to do. And I think that that's absolutely critical. You now know how seductively Daesh speaks to them. I think you must speak to them in a way that they know that you will be defending them and you will get them to help defend themselves in this. I think, for example, the civil rights defense that I'm speaking about, how do you launch anti-bullying campaigns? Because we think bully is the big fat boy who steals the chips of the small timid boy. Bullying in this age is, oh, you Muhammad, you the terrorist. I tell you, that is what we've got to be doing. How do we take this up in our schools? Protecting women, not because they're weak, but because they're so visible as Muslims that they are more liable to be abused. And so how do we build this thing? And Rashida always makes the point that the first time when something happens to you, you have the right to be surprised and perplexed. But that's where it ends. We actually need classes, like we did in South Africa. You actually need classes to take people through scenarios. So, I come up to you, I say, take off that scarf. The first time you cry. The second time, what will you do? I mean, one thing is you take off your phone, you put the camera on, and you say, what do you want to do? Please say that again. You can't be surprised the second time. How do we teach these kind of devices to our people?
Pepper spray.
Yeah.
Pepper spray.
Oh, pepper spray. So, but I think that there's just so much to do that I think there's no time to waste. I don't know, is that too concrete or too suggestive?
We are on the track.
Huda?
Can I just add a quick comment?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I just want to hone on empowering the youth, because I think the youth a lot of times don't feel that they're listened to. And I work with a lot of groups where they say their ideas are not taken seriously by the leaders. And so I think also to leave space for the youth to be able to lead some of the activities. There could be something in the center where it could be youth-led and it's their ideas and they're seeing their ideas being, taken into action and that they have a role to play. So that type of empowerment, not just telling them what they can do or that they can be protected. And then the second point is just to make sure also that the solidarity is not just because we're facing Islamophobia, but that it's a long-term strategy, that no matter what, we are going to be together and we're going to build, a solidarity with LGBTQ, with Black Lives Matter, Native Americans, not just because now we're being the victims, but it's a long-term strategy. And I think that's really important, because a lot of times I feel that a lot of us Muslims, we were not talking about, Black Lives Matter as much. We didn't think it was our problem, and all of a sudden now we are the victims and we're trying to say, okay, what can we do? So we need to make sure also that our voices are heard to say, we will also provide safety and protection.
Rashida,
Oh, yeah, I just think from the South African experience also, that Muslims, we often don't we don't celebrate the the great things we're already doing. So not just like starting a project, the fact that you are a doctor, a Muslim doctor, a Muslim engineer, those are the kind of things that you have to celebrate in our communities, and make that is your contribution as a citizen to America. So South African Muslims, one of the things that we've contributed so much to South Africa, not only through the anti-apartheid struggle, but just in our daily jobs, what we've become as a doctor, what we've discovered. And so I think often when we speak about what do, we tend to not ensure that we become great, or we are great in what we do. So we become a doctor, but we don't develop an app that will save people from diabetes. So that is also part of our duty in terms of citizens in our country. And I just want to take the last comment that was made, and that is doing the small stuff. You can't live next to your neighbor and don't want to meet with them because they eat pork. Or you're so scared that you don't want to go to their house in case they're going to give you something that you can just say, I'm sorry, I don't, and people adapt. So I think the small things matter, and especially especially at schools, you have to, and especially women that take their children to school, often you have to speak to the other parents that are there, so that they can understand that you are the same. The thing you can have Russians love their children, Muslims love their children too. So I think that's important. So sometimes we think about the big stuff and we forget about the small stuff. As the person said, do you speak to your colleague? Often we are colleagues, but we never speak about, I'm actually Rashida, a Muslim that feels under threat in this environment, to our colleagues. So I think that's just basic stuff that we should also be doing.
And you must get involved in the school. One day Rashida and I were invited by our son's school to provide things for the halal table, because there's quite a few halal. So I did my favorite sausage rolls and so forth, and I took it, and there it was on the halal table, and I went inside to watch the concert, and when I came out, it said halal table, and then in front of my sausage rolls, pigs in a blanket. so that was really the kind of situation that we were in. But from our side, I want to really thank you very, very much for staying the course. You've been here from last night. You're here towards the end. Riyadh will get us through the certification ceremony, and inshallah, we hope that this is the beginning of a phase in MAPS's life that you will look back and say, yeah, maybe those 3 people did some good. Inshallah, that's the best that we can hope for. Thank you very, very much.